Rachel hadn't cooked in months, but tonight she was making spaghetti. The moment I walked in and saw her chopping onions, I knew something was off. She had abandoned cooking months ago, ever since she discovered how convenient takeout could be. With a few taps on her phone, dinner would appear at our doorstep, no effort required. But tonight, she was humming softly in the kitchen as she moved from the stove to the counter, like we were some kind of picture-perfect suburban couple. The smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the air, and I leaned back in my chair, beer in hand, watching her like a detective might watch a suspect, knowing she had no idea she'd already been caught. She even wore that apron I bought her over a year ago, the one that still had the tag attached because she'd never bothered to use it. How convenient that she remembered it now, I thought, keeping my expression neutral. "So, what's the occasion?" I asked, keeping my tone casual, my voice light. Inside, my mind was racing, already fitting pieces together. Rachel's hands froze for a second, as if she'd been caught mid-crime, but she recovered quickly, too quickly. "No occasion," she said, her voice cheerful, a bit too bright, like an actress trying too hard to play a role. "I just thought we could have a nice dinner together, like we used to." Her smile might have fooled me years ago, back when things were simple, back when I trusted her. Hell, it might have even worked on someone who didn't know her, but I wasn't a stranger. I was her husband, and I wasn't buying whatever she was trying to sell tonight. Maybe in some other version of my life, I could have just enjoyed the meal. I could have played the part of the grateful husband, smiled, nodded, and pretended this was some big, heartfelt gesture. But I knew better. There was something behind this, something bigger than a homemade spaghetti dinner, and I was determined to find out what. As the meal went on, I watched her closely, looking for any telltale signs. About halfway through, I decided it was time to start testing the waters. I began, twirling some spaghetti on my fork. I ran into James earlier. He said he saw you at that new cafe downtown the other day. Didn't know you were into artisanal coffee. I could see the subtle change in her expression. She paused mid-sprinkle of Parmesan, her breath catching for just a second before she forced a laugh. That laugh. The one that came out high-pitched and awkward whenever she was trying to cover something up. "Oh, yeah. I met up with Cindy for a girls' day. Shopping, coffee, the usual." She waved it off, her hand fluttering like it was nothing, as if that would erase the doubt. But I wasn't buying it. Her voice was too chirpy, her smile too practiced, like when a kid lies about brushing their teeth. "Funny," I said, leaning back in my chair, my eyes fixed on her. "James said he saw you with some guy. Looked cozy," he said. I watched her face, and there it was. A flicker of panic, just a flash, before she covered it up again. "Oh, that must have been Rob from work," she said, her words coming out a little too quickly. "Just a business meeting. You know how clients are." "Rob." Of course, it was Rob. The guy from work who always seemed to be hovering too close, who always found an excuse to be near her at company events. Slick hair, perfectly tailored suits, the kind of guy who thought he was irresistible. I'd seen him plenty of times, and I hadn't liked him then. I liked him even less now, but I didn't let it show. I just nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Ah, Rob," I muttered, keeping my tone as indifferent as I could. "He seems helpful." We finished dinner in silence. Rachel's tension was almost palpable as she poked at her plate, her appetite seemingly gone. I pretended to enjoy the meal, though my mind was elsewhere. The spaghetti wasn't bad. The sauce had too much oregano, but under the circumstances, I wasn't about to complain. It was the best spaghetti she'd made in a long time, mostly because it was the only spaghetti she'd made in a long time. After dinner, Rachel excused herself to take a shower, probably hoping to wash away her guilt along with the smell of garlic. I sat on the couch, beer in hand, contemplating my next move. Then it hit me. Her phone. Rachel had never been secretive with her phone before. I'd known her passcode for years. Why wouldn't I? We trusted each other, right? So, I did what any rational, suspicious husband would do. I went through it. And before you start judging, let me be clear, this wasn't snooping. This was detective work, pure and simple. And trust me, I wasn't wrong. The messages weren't hard to find. There was a whole string of texts from Rob. At first, they seemed harmless enough. Can't wait to see you, and last night was fun. Innocent if you squint and pretend Rob's your grandmother. But then came the photos. Let's just say Rachel wasn't wearing business attire in the kind of lingerie she sent him. Unless, of course, the new office dress code included lace and strategic cutouts. I could have stormed into the bathroom right then, phone in hand, demanded an explanation. I could have yelled, thrown accusations, slammed her phone down. But that would have been too easy, too predictable. No! I wanted to see her squirm. So, I forwarded all the messages and photos to her phone from mine, poured myself another beer and waited. A few minutes later, Rachel emerged from the bathroom, a towel wrapped around her hair, looking fresh and innocent, like she hadn't spent the past few months making a fool out of me. She picked up her phone from the coffee table, and when it buzzed, her face turned pale. She stammered something about needing to check an email and practically sprinted to the bedroom. I followed, leaning against the doorway as I watched her frantically tap away at her phone, deleting messages, trying to cover her tracks. "Everything okay, babe?" I asked, my voice calm, detached. "You look a little stressed." She jumped, almost dropping her phone in her panic. "Oh, it's nothing," she said, her voice tight. "Just work stuff." "Work stuff?" I stepped closer, watching her like a predator who had finally cornered its prey. "You sure it's not Rob stuff?" Her face was priceless, guilt, panic, and a hint of horror. She opened her mouth to lie again, but I cut her off. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through the photos, and held them up to her. "Care to explain this?" I asked. "Or should I send them to Rob's wife myself?" Her face drained of color, and she stared at the photos on my phone, her eyes wide, like a deer caught in headlights. For a second, I thought she might try to deny it, tell me I misunderstood, maybe even blame Rob. But no, she just stood there, tears welling up, the kind of tears that were too big, too dramatic. "I'm sorry," she finally choked out, collapsing onto the bed as if the weight of everything had just hit her. "It was a mistake, okay? I didn't mean for it to happen. It didn't mean anything, I swear. I'd heard it all before. It didn't mean anything defense. Classic, like that was supposed to make it better." I watched her, barely resisting the urge to roll my eyes. There's something surreal about watching your wife beg for forgiveness, especially when you're not even angry anymore. If anything, I was just tired of playing the part of the clueless husband while she pretended to feel guilty. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Fix this?" I repeated, letting the words hang in the air, watching her struggle with the weight of her own betrayal. The air felt heavy, tension thick between us, like cigarette smoke that lingered long after the flame had died. I watched her as she stood there, tears streaming down her face. Her eyes pleaded with me, desperation making her tremble. "You really think you can fix this with a few tears and an apology?" I asked, my voice level but cold, each word hanging in the silence that followed. She sniffled, nodding with a frantic energy, like a student who hadn't done their homework but was still clinging to the hope of a passing grade. "Yes," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her own guilt. "I'll do anything. We can go to counseling, talk more. I'll cut Rob off. I already have. It's over, I swear." I raised an eyebrow, a flicker of contempt crossing my face. "You mean it's over now that you've been caught?" The question cut through the air and she flinched, her face twisting in pain. Good. At least she had the decency to look guilty. "Yes, but nothing." I cut her off, my patience thin. "You didn't confess because you felt guilty. You got caught, Rachel. And the only reason you're sorry now is because you know what's coming." Her lips quivered, and she tried to say something, but but I had no interest in hearing more of her rehearsed remorse. I had seen enough, heard enough. The truth was, I wasn't the tragic victim here. I'd known Rachel long enough to see the cracks forming. Maybe not with Rob specifically, but the signs had been there for months, longer, if I was honest with myself. The growing distance, the sudden excuses, the convenient late nights at a job that didn't demand more than 40 hours a week. It was only a matter of time before she slipped up. She just wasn't as clever as she thought she was. What she didn't realize, what she couldn't know, was that I had been making my own plans. I wasn't just sitting around, waiting to be blindsided like some clueless sitcom husband. No, I had already found my out. Her name was Linda. Rachel's sobs grew louder as she sank further into herself, becoming a fragile, broken version of the woman I once thought I loved. But the reality was, I didn't care anymore. She had checked out of our marriage long before Rob came into the picture. And if I was being honest, so had I. I just hadn't realized it until Linda came along. Linda and I met at work. It started off simple. Coffee breaks, small talk, shared frustrations about the job. But then, it grew into something more. Not physical, not yet, but emotionally, that line had been crossed months ago. And I didn't feel guilty about it. Not even a little. So while Rachel was sneaking around with Rob, I was preparing for the next step. Linda was everything Rachel wasn't. Funny, genuinely interested, and best of all, honest. She didn't hide behind lies or put up a front. But Rachel didn't need to know all that. Not yet. I finally moved closer, standing over her as she sat on the bed, wiping at her eyes. "What do you think happens now?" I asked, my tone flat and detached. She looked up at me, eyes wide, hope flickering like a dying flame. We work on it," she stammered, her voice shaky. "We go to therapy. We start over. We can fix this." Fix this? I almost laughed, the bitterness bubbling up. She really thought she could cry her way back into a clean slate. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. Kneeling down, I kept my voice calm, steady. "You know, Rachel, if you put even half the effort into our marriage that you did sneaking around with Rob, maybe we wouldn't be here." Her bottom lip trembled, more tears spilling down her cheeks, but I wasn't done. "But here's the thing," I continued, leaning in closer. "I'm not mad. Really, I'm not." I paused, watching as confusion began to cloud her expression, the guilt momentarily forgotten. "Honestly, I'm relieved." "Relieved?" she whispered, blinking in disbelief. "What do you mean, relieved?" I stood up, grabbing my jacket from the back of the chair. "Relieved because this made me realize something." I took my time, letting the silence linger. "I've been seeing someone too." Her eyes widened, shock spreading across her face. "What?" "Well, not exactly seeing," I shrugged. "Let's call it preparing to upgrade. Her name's Linda. We've gotten close. She's everything you're not. Funny, smart, actually interested in me. Not just when it's convenient." Rachel's face shifted, moving from disbelief to shock, and finally settling into a hollow, defeated expression. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I walked toward the door, pausing to give her one last look. "I'll be staying with her for a bit. You might want to start figuring out what's next for you. And Rob, I wouldn't worry too much. Guys like him don't change, and I'm pretty sure his wife already knows. Have fun with that." And with that, I left, the door clicking shut behind me. Her sobs echoed down the hallway, but I didn't care. The marriage had ended long before tonight. All that was left was the paperwork. Outside, the night air felt cool against my face, a strange sense of peace settling over me. You'd think walking out on your wife, knowing she had been cheating, would feel chaotic, but it wasn't. It felt calm, almost serene, like I had finally crossed the finish line of a marathon I never wanted to run. I sat in the car, the quiet settling around me as I let the events of the night sink in. I should have felt something, anger, grief, regret. But all I felt was a relief I'd mentioned. Rachel had cried her tears, said her apologies, but none of it mattered. I wasn't naive. Once the shock wore off, she'd find a way to twist the story, make it about me, my shortcomings, my failures. But none of that mattered now. I wasn't going to Linda's tonight. Not yet. There were loose ends I needed to tie up. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found her, Rob's wife. I had saved her number from a company Christmas party we'd both attended, making polite conversation while our spouses mingled elsewhere. I could send her the texts, the photos, blow this whole thing wide open. But then what? I'd be dragging her into this mess, blowing up her life just like mine had been. In the end, I put my phone away. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Rob's wife would figure it out eventually. Guys like him always slip up again. She'd handle it when the time came. I started the car and drove, no destination in mind. I needed to clear my head. About half an hour later, I ended up parked in front of a familiar bar. The kind of place where no one asks questions, where people go to be alone with their thoughts. I walked in, the dim lighting and low hum of conversation offering some sense of anonymity. I ordered a bourbon neat and let the burn distract me. The bartender slid the glass over without a word, sensing that I wasn't there for small talk. I thought about Linda. She didn't know about tonight, about what had just gone down with Rachel. I hadn't told her about Rachel's affair. It wasn't her problem, and she didn't deserve to get tangled up in my baggage, at least not yet. I didn't even know where things with her were headed, but it was already clear that it felt like something better than what I had with Rachel. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through my messages with Linda. The difference between those texts and the ones I found between Rachel and Rob was stark. No sleazy innuendos, just simple, genuine conversations, jokes, shared moments, real connections. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that kind of connection until I felt it again. But was it enough? Was I ready to jump into something new? I didn't know, and maybe I didn't need to figure that out tonight. I sipped my bourbon, staring at the rows of bottles lined up behind the bar. The bartender and the other patrons left me alone, each lost in their own world. It was one of those rare moments of solitude you don't realize you need until you're in it. The quiet hum of life moving on while I sat there, letting mine reset. Eventually, I pulled out my phone again, opening the draft I'd started weeks ago, an email to my lawyer. The subject line was still blank. Divorce. Such a cold, clinical word to describe the unraveling of a life you once built with someone. But there was, waiting to be sent. The email wasn't dramatic. Just a few lines explaining I was ready to move forward, that I needed his services soon. I hadn't sent it before because I wasn't sure. Maybe some part of me hoped Rachel would turn things around, that we'd have a breakthrough, that things would magically fix themselves. But tonight made it clear. There was no going back. I hovered over the send button for a moment, feeling that last flicker of hesitation. Memories flashed before my eyes. The laughs, the touches, the little moments that used to mean something. But those memories were gone, replaced by lies and secrets, by the cold reality of what we